Governor Mike Huckabee now to talk about it. Governor, nice to see you this morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning. Let's dial up the satellite.
Thank you. Good morning.
There we go. This is not a radio show. Do we have him? Do we have his? We can hear him. We can hear you, Governor.
He's such a handsome guy. We want to see
There
his
he
face.
is. There he is. Nice to see you this morning, Governor. Now we can see you.
Good morning.
Let's talk about Rex Tillerson. We've been talking about it here on the couch this morning, and it looks like the campaign, the transition team, sort of maybe let this leak a little bit out to the press to see how this would play over the weekend. And we talked to Brad Blakeman a short time ago, who says we'll probably see an announcement on Monday or Tuesday as Secretary of State. But the mainstream media jumped all over this, of course, over the weekend, labeling his ties to Vladimir Putin as concerning, calling him an oil tycoon. Surprise you at all?
No, not really. I mean, I think the Democrats have got to target some of the appointees to try to prove that they're relevant. And let's be fair. The purpose of the confirmation process is to do exactly that, to confirm, to make sure that a person is up to the job, that there's nothing in their background that would cause alarm. This is an incredibly important position. I think the Democrats and the Republicans have a constitutional responsibility to fully vet anybody who's going to be the Secretary of State. But they need to be reasonable. I mean, they need to actually check to whether he's prepared for the job, not to go back and see if he played a prank when he was in college, or if in some memo he wrote to a staffer 35 years ago he said something that was politically incorrect.
Yeah.
Let's hope that this is a confirmation, not a witch hunt.
Well, this pick obviously surprised the media yesterday, and that's something that President-elect Trump seems to love to do, to sort of surprise people when they least expect it. Someone else that might surprise this morning as he's waking up is Mitt Romney, who was, it seemed like was very much up for this position. Was he ever taken seriously for that job? What is your sense on that, and how do you think he's feeling this morning?
Well, look, I think he was taken seriously. He had 2 different interviews with President-elect Trump, so that indicates that there was at least serious consideration. There were many of us who had some heartburn about it, as I've stated repeatedly. But look, I think he ought to feel like that Donald Trump was a magnanimous man that was willing to consider him and put him on the list in spite of the horrific things that he had said about Donald Trump. I think it shows a lot about the character of Donald Trump and his nature to forgive, forget, and move on.
Yeah, Governor, I mean, you mentioned the confirmation process. Obviously, a lot of the media, as we pointed out, already jumping on him. The Washington Post said, there's a headline that said Tillerson might be the worst Secretary of State contender on Trump's list. So the media is condemning him outright, and you see a few more of the headlines on here. I mean, they're coming out front. You mentioned confirmation, though, where it really matters. There's Democrats and Republicans. They're promising that confirmation battle. This is what Senator John McCain had to say about Rex Tillerson, and I want to get you to react to his initial perception. Take a listen.
I'd have to examine it, and you want to give the President of the United States the benefit of the doubt because of the people have spoken. But Vladimir Putin is a thug, a bully, and a murderer, and anybody else who describes him as anything else is lying. So we cannot have an accommodation with the Russians until they understand what Ronald Reagan taught them, and that is peace through strength. And right now we have no peace and we have no strength. So it depends. I don't know what Mr. Tillerson's relationship with Vladimir Putin was, but I'll tell you, it is a matter of concern to me.
Governor, does that become an issue?
Not necessarily. I mean, the fact that Exxon does business in countries all over the world, so what? It does business in Russia. Does that mean that Tillerson is somehow a puppet of Vladimir Putin? Not at all. It may be that it turns out that Putin is afraid of Tillerson more than the other way around. So, look, it's perfectly normal to go through this process, ask those questions, get the answers. But to me, the best confirmation prospect for Tillerson is that the national media, who hates Trump, hates everybody he picks. Yeah. I mean, that's a wonderful affirmation that he must be looking at some pretty darn good people.
Well, speaking of Putin, and there was a lot of concern as to whether or not the Russians were involved in our election process. And, of course, we heard the CIA report over the past few days that talked about Russian involvement in the 2016 election. And yet the FBI is concerned about the CIA's report. And I want to read this from the FBI's statement on this in the Washington Post. The Bureau, true to its law enforcement roots, wants facts and tangible evidence to prove something beyond all reasonable doubt. The CIA is more comfortable drawing inferences from behavior. Seems like a little battle inside the intelligence community this morning.
Well, there is, and I think it's to the nature of the fact that the FBI wants enough evidence that they can take to court, prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The CIA can be a little more flexible and say, you know, based on our best opinions, this is what we think, this is what we infer. But this premise is totally ridiculous, that somehow the Russians were the ones who were responsible for Donald Trump's election. That's nonsense. I mean, the Democrats have come up with so many different smokescreens. It was, you know, the media's fault. That's a laugher. It was Comey's fault. It was a vote counting issue, a la Jill Stein. You know, every time you turn around, there's something else they're whining about. Look, they lost. I don't know how they can figure this, but it wasn't the Russians that beat them. It was a lack of ideas. It was Hillary being a very poor candidate. It was, in maybe some measure, the reality of what was leaked in those emails, the fact that we found out the Democrats really did hold contempt for Catholics and evangelicals, religious people of all stripes, called them deplorables. That was on the public record. But to say that the Russians would like to have Trump, look, the Russians have been playing this administration like a fiddle. Remember the reset button where Hillary meant to say reset and the word said overcharged, and it was such a flap and embarrassment? Remember when Obama put his hand on Medvedev's knee and said, we can be more flexible after the election is over? And what did the Russians do? They ignored the Americans. They did whatever they wanted to do, and they did it with a smirk on their face.
Governor,
I don't think that's going to happen under Donald Trump.
So on Rex Tillerson, it's rumored that Ambassador John Bolton would be his #2. Briefly, how do you feel about that as a #2?
Brilliant choice, because John not only knows where the bodies are buried, he probably buried a few. And my guess is, knowing John, when he gets there, he'll bury quite a few more, and he may take the fog out of foggy bottom, which is very, very important.
Foggy bottom.
Governor, thanks for being here this morning. Good to see you, sir.
Foggy Creek down there in Arkansas.
Great to see you guys.
We appreciate it, Governor.